March 15th, 1945, Washington, D.C., War Production Board. Edith Thornhill was polishing the brass nameplate outside the deputy director's office when she heard the words that changed everything. Not the usual talk that drifted from the conference room, procurement contracts, steel allocations, factory quotas. She'd heard that kind of talk for 20 years. Different words. The young administrator in his crisp new suit said to the personnel chief, "That old mare can go. Get someone younger, easier on the eyes." They were talking about her. Edith Thornhill was 58 years old. She'd scrubbed the floors of federal buildings since 1925, when she was 38, when Calvin Coolidge was president, 6 years before her husband would drink himself to death after losing his job in the crash. 20 years invisible. First at the Department of Commerce's Bureau of Standards, then here at the War Production Board after the reorganization in 1942. A janitor wasn't a person, just a function. A mop with legs. In those 20 years, she'd heard enough to fill a dozen federal indictments. But she kept silent. Mopped floors, emptied wastebaskets, dusted ledges where documents sometimes lay open. Documents with numbers that would make an ordinary American's head spin. She stayed silent because she needed the work. Because after Harold died in 1931, broke and drunk, she had nowhere else to turn. Because the boarding house room in Southeast, 100 square feet, shared bathroom down the hall, required payment every Friday. Now they were letting her go. Just like that. No severance, no thank you, nothing at all. March 17th, 1945, they called her to personnel. The chief, Chester Yardley, a 42-year-old man whose face had learned to show nothing, slid a paper across his desk. She picked up the pen. Looked at the document. Nothing about severance pay. She asked quietly, the way she always spoke in these offices. Chester Yardley smirked. Edith Thornhill signed. Her hand didn't shake. She took her employment record, where 20 years compressed into one line. Custodial services. Walked out of the office. Descended to the basement supply room, where the mops and buckets and rags lived. Removed her work smock. Put on her threadbare coat. Sat on a wooden stool among the cleaning chemicals, and thought about how she'd kept silent for 20 years. Just silent and listening. She remembered August 1927, Department of Commerce, Bureau of Standards, Office of the Procurement Chief, Virgil Bascom. She'd been washing the windows. Bascom was on the telephone, paying her no mind. "Listen, Frank, that shipment of copper went to Cleveland. Documents say 70 tons. Reality, 45. Rest went to a private smelter. Half the profit's yours, half's ours. The factory meets its quota. We get our bonuses. Everybody's happy." Bascom hung up, looked at Edith the way you'd look at furniture. Quote 6. She got them. Virgil Bascom lit a cigarette, dropped ash on the floor she'd just cleaned. She remembered January 1932, Deputy Director's conference room at Commerce. 5 men around the table. Edith was refilling the water pitcher. One of the officials, a man about 37, she remembered his name, Oswald Pritchard, said, quote 7. Another man replied, quote 8. They discussed their schemes calmly while Edith moved invisibly around the room. She was part of the furniture. She remembered September 1933, late evening, Bascom's office. Edith was mopping after hours. Light showed under his door, which stood slightly ajar. She heard voices, Bascom and 2 other men, talking quietly, but in the empty building sound carried well. "Inspector from Commerce is coming day after tomorrow, checking the warehouses. If he finds discrepancies, we're finished." Second voice, unfamiliar. "We could offer him money." Third voice, also unfamiliar. "Risky. He's one of the new Roosevelt people. Young. Might refuse and report us." Bascom paused, then said, "So not cash. Something else. Does he have weaknesses?" Second voice. "Word is he drinks." Bascom. "Good. Set him up. Girl, bottle, hotel room. Camera. Next day, show him the photographs. Explain the inspection needs to come back clean, or the pictures go to his department chief. They discussed it calmly, methodically, like a chess game. Edith finished the hallway floor. When the men emerged from the office, they walked past her without looking. She was part of the furniture. She remembered May 1936, Deputy Director for Personnel's office. Edith was dusting the bookshelves. Two men sat at the desk, the deputy director and an unfamiliar man in a plain suit. The plainclothes man was saying, quote 15, quote. The deputy director nodded. Quote 16, quote. The plainclothes man smiled. Quote 17, quote. They talked about this while Edith wiped the spines of regulation manuals. Then the deputy director said, quote 18. She brought it. 20 years. First 15 at Commerce's Bureau of Standards, then 3 more after it was absorbed into the War Production Board in 1942. Thousands of conversations, hundreds of names. Contracts with private manufacturers where half the government payment ended up in officials' pockets. Falsified production reports, shell companies, accounts in Canadian banks discussed in whispers. Apartments in good buildings distributed not by need but by connections. Cars, vacation homes, club memberships, none of it going to people who did the work, but to people who knew how to arrange things. She heard them discuss eliminating inconvenient people. Not physically, no, that wasn't how it worked in America, but professionally. Isolation, career destruction, threats to family. She heard them laugh at people who thought honesty mattered. March 18, 1945. Edith Thornhill sat in her boarding house room. 100 square feet. Iron bed, small table, straight chair, wardrobe. Window facing the alley. On the table lay her employment record. Next to it, her savings book. $412. Everything she'd saved in 20 years. Enough to live 4 months if she was very careful. Then what? Look for new work? At 58? Who needed a 58-year-old janitor when young women were everywhere? She sat and thought. And the more she thought, the clearer it became. For 20 years, she'd been nobody. A mop, a rag, an object. They'd talked about everything in front of her because she didn't exist as a person. But now they'd thrown her out like you throw out a worn-out mop. And that's when Edith Thornhill thought, what if the mop started talking? She remembered one face, a reporter, Lawrence Whitmore. He'd come to the War Production Board in 1943, writing a piece about wartime industrial achievements. Young man, maybe 35, tall, lean, intelligent eyes. She'd seen him in the corridors several times. Once he'd said hello to her. Not just walked past, actually said, quote, 19. That was unusual. None of the officials greeted janitors. She remembered his name, Whitmore, Lawrence Whitmore, correspondent for the Washington Herald. Edith Thornhill stood, put on her coat, left her room, took the streetcar to the Herald offices. The Herald building on 14th Street, gray walls, security guard at the entrance. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 20, underscore, underscore. The guard looked at her, elderly woman in a worn coat, and asked, quote, 21, quote, 22. The guard shrugged. Quote, 23. Quote, Edith climbed the stairs. The corridor smelled of ink and tobacco. Room 403. She knocked. She entered. Lawrence Whitmore sat at a desk buried in papers, looked up, didn't recognize her. Yes? Edith sat in the chair across from him. I worked for the federal government, 20 years, as a janitor, first at the Department of Commerce, then at the War Production Board. They fired me. Whitmore nodded politely. That's unfortunate, but... Edith interrupted. I know things that would destroy that agency. Lawrence Whitmore froze, looked at her carefully. What exactly do you know? Edith Thornhill talked for 3 hours, named names, dates, amounts, schemes. Whitmore took notes, at first skeptically, then faster and faster. When she told him about the copper shipment from 1927, he asked, "You heard this yourself?" "Yes." "Where?" "In the procurement chief's office at Commerce. I was washing windows." When she told him about the inspector in 1933, he asked, "Can you name the inspector?" "No, but I can give you the date, September 1933. And I can tell you the inspection came back clean. That should be in the records." When she told him about the troublemaker lists from 1936, Whitmore went pale. "That's a serious accusation." "I know." "Do you have proof?" "No, only what I heard." Whitmore set down his pen. "You understand, without proof these are just words. You're a janitor. You were fired. You're angry. You might just be seeking revenge." Edith Thornhill looked at him. "Check 3 facts. Any 3. If they prove out, the rest is true too." Lawrence Whitmore thought, then said, "All right, give me 3 facts I can verify." Edith thought. First fact. In 1931, Commerce purchased imported equipment for a textile mill in Massachusetts. Documents show 15 looms from England. The mill received 10. The other 5 were sold on the side. Check the receiving reports at the mill against Commerce's shipping manifests. Numbers won't match. Whitmore wrote it down. Second, in 1935, an engineer named Theodore Brennan was forced to resign from Commerce. Official reason? Family circumstances. Real reason? They pressured him out because he was asking uncomfortable questions about missing inventory. His son, Roger Brennan, failed to gain admission to the Naval Academy that same year despite excellent grades. Check. The Academy superintendent in 1935 had connections to bureau officials. Find that connection and you'll understand the scheme. Whitmore wrote it down. Third, in 1939, a young economist joined the bureau. Name, Marcus Caldwell. Smart, principled. 6 months later, he was fired for moral turpitude. Supposedly, he made advances toward a secretary. Check this. The secretary received a new apartment that same month. 2-bedroom, in Georgetown, through connections. Whitmore studied his notes. "I'll need time. Weeks, maybe months. I have time. If even one of these doesn't check out, I can't run the story." "They'll check out." Whitmore looked at her. This small, elderly woman in her worn coat, speaking with absolute certainty. Why now? Why not 5 years ago? 10 years ago? Edith Thornhill said quietly, 5 years ago I had something to lose. A job. Security. They could hurt me. Now they've already thrown me out. I have nothing left to lose. Now I can speak freely. Whitmore nodded. "I'll start checking. Give me a way to contact you." She wrote down her boarding house address. Stood. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm 58 years old. I've spent 20 years being invisible. But invisible people see everything. Everything." April 1945. Lawrence Whitmore worked. He visited the Massachusetts textile mill, spoke with the plant manager, now retired. "Yes, we got 10 looms in 1931. Documents said 15, but only 10 arrived. We complained. We're told it was a shipping error. Nothing we could do." Whitmore checked Commerce's files. Manifests showed 15 looms shipped, 10 received, 5 missing. No explanation. He went to Pittsburgh, found Theodore Brennan, now 67, working as a consultant. Brennan's face darkened. "I didn't resign. I was forced out." "Why?" "I found discrepancies in the copper accounts, reported them to my supervisor. Next thing I knew, My son Roger was denied academy admission despite top grades. Someone made it clear. Stop asking questions or things get worse for Roger. I stopped asking, left Washington. Who was your supervisor? Virgil Bascom. Whitmore checked academy records. Roger Brennan. Excellent grades, excellent recommendations. Denied admission 1935. The academy superintendent that year, Admiral Vernon Hastings. Whitmore dug deeper. Admiral Hastings had served on a procurement advisory committee. Virgil Bascom sat on the same committee. Connection confirmed. He tracked Marcus Caldwell, found him in Chicago, working for a private firm. Mr. Caldwell, you were fired from Commerce in 1939? Caldwell laughed bitterly. Fired? Destroyed is more accurate. They said I harassed a secretary. Complete fabrication. I'd questioned why certain contracts were going to specific companies at inflated prices. 3 weeks later, the secretary, woman named Helen Vickers, claimed I'd made improper advances. I was fired immediately. No investigation. No chance to defend myself. What happened to Helen Vickers? Last I heard, she got a nice apartment in Georgetown. Funny how that worked out. Whitmore checked property records. Helen Vickers, new lease, Georgetown, 2-bedroom, March 1939. 1 month after Caldwell's dismissal. Rent well above her secretary's salary. Co-signer on the lease. A name Whitmore recognized from his notes. Deputy Director's Office. 3 facts. 3 confirmations. Whitmore sat in his apartment with his notes spread across the table. Edith Thornhill had told the truth. Every word. Which meant everything else she'd said was likely true as well. This wasn't just corruption. This was systematic, organized fraud spanning 2 decades at federal agencies managing industrial standards and war production. 20 years of theft, blackmail, and cover-ups. May 1945. The war in Europe ended. Celebrations in the streets. But Lawrence Whitmore wasn't celebrating. He was writing. The story of his career. He titled it, The Invisible Witness, 20 Years of Corruption in Federal Procurement. He took it to his editor, Malcolm Drake. Drake read it. Looked up at Whitmore. You're sure about this? Completely sure. The source? A janitor. Worked there 20 years. Heard everything. Will she go on record? Yes. They'll destroy her credibility, say she's a disgruntled former employee. They can try, but the facts check out. I've verified multiple incidents. The paper trail is there if anyone looks. Drake leaned back. This will cause a firestorm. I know. The agencies will come after us. They're lawyers, politicians who benefit from the corruption. Let them come. Drake smiled. All right, we run it. Front page, Sunday edition. May 20th, 1945. The Washington Herald, front page. The Invisible Witness, 20 Years of Corruption in Federal Procurement. Byline, Lawrence Whitmore. The story ran 4 full pages. Names, dates, schemes. And the source, Edith Thornhill, 58, former janitor, 20 years of service, fired without cause, now speaking truth to power. The reaction was immediate. By Monday morning, the Herald's offices were flooded with calls. Some supportive, many threatening. The War Production Board issued a statement. Chester Yardley, the personnel chief, told reporters, but other newspapers picked up the story. The Washington Post sent reporters to verify Whitmore's facts. They confirmed everything. The New York Times ran its own investigation, found more examples of corruption Edith hadn't even mentioned. By June 1945, Congress announced hearings. The House Committee on War Expenditures. Chairman, Representative Ellis Blackwood, Nebraska, known for his integrity. He subpoenaed documents, called witnesses. First witness, Edith Thornhill. June 15, 1945. House Hearing Room, Capitol Hill. Edith Thornhill sat at the witness table. wearing her best dress, the one she wore to church, now 20 years old, carefully mended. Around her, congressmen, lawyers, reporters, cameras. She'd never seen so many people looking at her. For 20 years, she'd been invisible. Now, everyone was watching. Representative Blackwood spoke gently. Edith nodded. Edith spoke, calmly, clearly. No emotion, just facts. She told them about the copper scheme, the equipment fraud, the blackmailed inspector, the purge lists, the forced resignations. She named names: Virgil Bascombe, Oswald Pritchard, Chester Yardley, others. 16 names total. For each one, she provided dates, locations, specifics. The agency's attorney tried to discredit her. Mrs. Thornhill, you're a janitor with a high school education. How can you remember all these details from years ago? Edith looked at him. Sir, when you're invisible, people forget you're there. They talk freely. And when you spend 20 years listening, you remember what matters. But surely you could be confused about dates. Names? I could be. But Mr. Whitmore verified my facts. The records confirm what I said. Or you're collaborating with him to fabricate a story because you're angry about being fired. Check the records yourself, sir. Numbers don't lie. The attorney pressed on. Mrs. Thornhill, isn't it true you were fired for poor performance? Edith smiled slightly. No, sir. I was fired because they wanted someone younger and prettier. I heard them say so. March 15th of this year. Young administrator told the personnel chief, that old mare can go. Get someone younger, easier on the eyes. You expect us to believe you remember the exact words? Yes, sir. When someone calls you an old mare, you remember. The hearing room laughed. Not at her. With her. Representative Blackwood gavelled for order, then said, Mrs. Thornhill, one more question. Why did you wait until now to come forward? Edith thought. Because before now, I had something to lose. A job. A livelihood. If I'd spoken up while I was still employed, they would have fired me, destroyed my reputation, and nothing would have changed. Now, I'm already fired. They've already done their worst, so I can tell the truth without fear. Representative Blackwood nodded. Thank you, Mrs. Thornhill. Your courage is admirable. Edith shook her head. It's not courage, sir. Courage is speaking when you have something to lose. This is just telling the truth when you have nothing left to lose. That's not courage. That's just common sense. Summer 1945. The investigation expanded. Federal prosecutors got involved. FBI agents combed through agency records. They found everything. The shell companies, the kickback schemes, the falsified reports, bank accounts in Canada and Mexico, property deeds showing officials owned homes far beyond their government salaries. 20 years of carefully hidden corruption, all exposed because one invisible woman decided to speak. August 1945. Japan surrendered. The war ended. But another war was just beginning. The legal battle. 16 indictments. Virgil Bascombe. Fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. Oswald Pritchard. Extortion, obstruction of justice. Chester Yardley. Bribery, falsification of records. And 13 others. The trials began in September. Edith testified at each one. Always the same. Calm, factual, unshakable. Defense attorneys tried everything. Attacked her memory, her motives, her credibility. She never wavered. I heard what I heard. I saw what I saw. Check the records. By December 1945, convictions started coming in. Virgil Bascombe, guilty on all counts. 15 years federal prison. Oswald Pritchard, guilty. 12 years. Chester Yardley, guilty. 8 years. By March 1946, all 16 had been convicted, sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years. Total restitution ordered, $8 million. Back to the Treasury. Money that had been stolen from American taxpayers during wartime. The War Production Board was being dissolved anyway. The war was over. Its remaining operations transferred to other agencies. New leadership, new oversight, new rules. Because one janitor had kept silent for 20 years, then spoken for 3 hours. Spring 1946. Edith Thornhill received a letter from the Treasury Department. Inside, a check, $5,000. Reward for information leading to recovery of stolen government funds. $5,000. More money than she'd earned in 5 years of scrubbing floors. She took the check to her boarding house landlady. Mrs. Patterson looked at the money. Underscore underscore quote underscore 102 underscore 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 quote underscore 103 underscore 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 quote underscore 104 underscore underscore. Edith also received letters, hundreds of them, from ordinary Americans, factory workers, clerks, secretaries, other janitors, all saying the same thing. Underscore underscore quote underscore 105 underscore underscore Lawrence Whitmore won awards, the Pulitzer Prize for Investigative Reporting, the National Press Club Award, others. He came to see Edith. Edith disagreed. June 1946. Social Security Administration contacted Edith. Quote 112 pension, starting immediately, even though she was only 59. $65 a month. Not much, but enough. Combined with her reward money, she'd be secure. No more scrubbing floors. No more being invisible. She could live quietly, modestly, honestly. She moved from the boarding house, rented a small apartment, 1 bedroom, Northeast Washington. Clean, safe. Her own kitchen, her own bathroom. First time in her life she'd had her own bathroom. She furnished it simply, used furniture from second-hand shops, nothing fancy. She didn't need fancy. She needed her own space. Fall 1946. Theodore Brennan came to Washington, visited Edith. Mrs. Thornhill, I wanted to thank you. Because of your testimony, my son Roger got a formal apology from the Naval Academy. They've offered him a position in the Academy's administrative office. Not as a midshipman, he's past that age, but as a civilian instructor, teaching engineering. It's more than I ever hoped for. Edith smiled. He earned it. They stole it. You got it back. That's justice. Brennan shook his head. Justice is what you did, risking everything to tell the truth. I didn't risk everything. I had nothing left to risk. That's different. Maybe, but still brave. No, necessary. Marcus Caldwell also came, from Chicago. Mrs. Thornhill, my name has been cleared. The Herald published a full retraction of the harassment allegations. The woman who made the accusations, Helen Vickers, confessed it was all fabricated. She was pressured into it, given that apartment as payment. Now she's cooperating with prosecutors. What will you do now? Edith asked. I've been offered positions at several agencies, under the new administrations. They want people with integrity. Will you take one? Caldwell thought. Yes, not for revenge, but to make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to others, to help fix the system. Edith nodded. That's the right reason. The holidays approached. Edith prepared for Christmas, bought a small tree, decorated it with paper ornaments she made herself. On Christmas Eve, Lawrence Whitmore came with his wife and 2 children, brought gifts, a warm coat, new shoes, books. You shouldn't have, Edith protested. You gave me the story of my career, Whitmore said. This is nothing. They shared dinner, ham, potatoes, green beans, simple food, but enough. After the children went to play, Whitmore asked, Edith, if you could go back, knowing everything, would you still have stayed silent for 20 years? She thought. Yes, because if I'd spoken earlier, they'd have just fired me. Or worse, I spoke when I had nothing left to lose. That's when they couldn't stop me. The timing was right. So you calculated it all? No, it just happened. But I don't regret it. Winter 1947. 2 years since the Herald story. Edith Thornhill received an invitation from the Women's National Press Club. She declined, wrote back. She lived quietly, attended church on Sundays, volunteered at a soup kitchen on Wednesdays, read library books, took walks in the park. An ordinary life, the life she'd always wanted. No fame, no attention, just peace. Sometimes she thought about the men she'd helped convict. Bascombe in prison, Pritchard in prison, Yardley in prison. 16 men whose lives she destroyed with her testimony. Did she feel guilty? No. They'd destroyed themselves. She'd just revealed what they'd done. Truth wasn't destruction. Lies were destruction. Truth was just light. She received occasional letters from the convicted men's families. Most were angry. Quote, 134, quote, 135, quote. She didn't reply. What could she say? Your father ruined himself. Your husband destroyed himself. They wouldn't believe her. They'd never believe her. But one letter was different. From Virgil Bascombe's daughter. Eleanor Bascombe, age 26. Underscore, quote, underscore 136, underscore. Edith kept that letter, put it in her Bible, alongside the letters from Brennan, Caldwell, Whitmore. Evidence that truth, however painful, could heal. Spring 1948, 3 years later, Edith received news. Several of the convicted officials had appealed their sentences. All appeals denied. The evidence was overwhelming. The convictions stood. Justice had been served. That spring, cherry blossoms bloomed. Edith walked along the tidal basin, watched the pink petals fall, thought about cycles. Everything has cycles. Seasons, governments, corruption and reform. The pendulum swings. Right now it was swinging toward honesty, thanks partly to her. But someday it would swing back toward corruption. Human nature didn't change. Power corrupted. Always had. Always would. But that's why watchful eyes mattered. Every generation needed its witnesses, its truth-tellers. People willing to risk everything for honesty. She'd been her generation's witness. Someone else would be the next generation's. The fight continued. Forever. She received a newspaper clipping in the mail from Dorothy Klein, a janitor at the Pentagon who'd read her story. Dorothy had reported procurement fraud, documents showing kickbacks on construction contracts. Investigation launched. Dorothy included a note. Underscore, quote, underscore, 137, underscore. Edith smiled. The torch passed. Dorothy would be fine. She'd learned the lesson. Invisibility was power when wielded wisely. The powerful ignored invisible people. And that's when invisible people could gather the truth that would destroy the powerful. Summer 1948. Edith was 61. Social Security adjusted her pension upward. Now $80 a month. A fortune. She didn't need that much. Started donating $20 monthly to a charity for widows and orphans. Money she'd earned by telling the truth. Now helping others who had nothing. She thought sometimes about Harold. Her husband, dead 17 years. What would he have thought? Harold had been a dreamer, believed in fairness, justice, the American way. Then the crash came. He lost his job, couldn't find another. Started drinking. Drank himself to death at 43, bitter and broken. Would he be proud of her now? She thought so. She'd done what he would have wanted. Stood up for what was right. Even if it took her 20 years to find the courage. Fall 1948. Lawrence Whitmore published a book. Quote, 138. Based on his articles, expanded with new research, he sent Edith an advance copy. Inscribed, quote, 139. The book became a bestseller. Whitmore offered Edith half the royalties. She refused. The book brought more attention. Reporters wanting interviews, publishers wanting her memoirs. She declined everything. Winter 1949. 4 years later. Edith was 62. One more winter, then spring. Cherry blossoms. She loved spring in Washington. The monuments, the memorials, the blossoms. Beauty in the capital. Beauty she'd helped preserve by fighting corruption. Every honest dollar spent on maintaining those monuments was a dollar that hadn't been stolen. Small victory, but real. She volunteered more. Soup kitchen 3 days a week now. She saw others like herself. Elderly women who'd worked hard all their lives. Invisible women. Cleaning ladies, laundresses, seamstresses. Women who'd kept the city running while being ignored. She knew their worth. She'd been one of them. She still was one of them. Her 15 minutes of fame didn't change that. One day at the soup kitchen, Dorothy Klein came to meet her in person. Edith smiled. Spring 1950. 5 years since the Herald story. Edith marked the anniversary quietly, baked a small cake, ate a slice alone in her apartment, thought about the journey. From invisible janitor to public witness, from powerless to powerful. Not powerful in the traditional sense, she had no money, no position, no influence, but powerful in truth. She'd spoken truth and truth had prevailed. That was the only power that mattered. She received a final letter that spring, from Virgil Bascom, from prison. Mrs. Thornhill, I'm writing from confinement. I want you to know, I hate what you did. You destroyed my life, my career, my family. But I understand why you did it. I was a thief, a liar. I hurt honest people. I deserved exposure, not prison. I deserved truth. You gave me truth. For that, I'm grateful. And sorry. Sorry for what I did. Sorry for what I was. I'm 62 now, same age as you. I'll die in here. But I'll die knowing the truth came out. That's worth something. Thank you. And forgive me. Edith read the letter, reread it, then wrote back, the only reply she'd ever sent to any of the convicted men. __quote _147 summer 1950. The Korean War began. New crisis, new government urgency, new opportunities for corruption. Edith read the newspapers, wondered if somewhere another invisible worker was watching, listening, documenting. She hoped so. The fight against corruption never ended. It required eternal vigilance, and eternal vigilance required watchful eyes, the eyes of secretaries, janitors, clerks, the invisible people who saw everything. She wrote a letter to the editor. The Washington Herald published it. Quote, 148, quote. The letter generated responses, dozens of letters to the editor, most supportive. Quote, 149, quote. A few critical, quote. 150, quote. She didn't care about critics. She'd said what needed saying. Fall 1950. Edith turned 63. Birthday party at the soup kitchen. Her fellow volunteers surprised her. Cake, candles, singing. Simple celebration. She cried. Not from sadness, but from gratitude. She had friends, people who valued her. Not for what she'd done, but for who she was. A kind woman who helped others. That's all she'd ever wanted to be. Lawrence Whitmore came to the party, brought his family. Edith, my daughter asked me to give you this. His daughter, 8 years old now, handed Edith a drawing. A woman holding a broom in one hand and a scroll labeled Truth in the other. Edith laughed. Is this me? The girl nodded. Daddy says you're a hero. He says you proved that regular people can change the world. Edith knelt down to the girl's level. __quote _155 ___. She hung the drawing in her apartment, on the wall by her bed. Every morning she woke up and saw it, reminder of why she'd spoken. Not for glory, not for recognition, but because it was right. Because truth mattered. Because corruption hurt ordinary people and someone needed to defend them. Winter 1951. Edith got sick. Pneumonia. Hospitalized for 3 weeks. The doctors worried. At 63, pneumonia could be fatal. But she recovered. Stubborn constitution. She'd survived a lot, losing her husband, losing her job, facing down powerful men in congressional hearings. She'd survived pneumonia too. While recovering, she thought about death. Not fearfully, but practically. She was 63. Not old by some standards, but not young either. She had no children, no close family. Who would remember her when she was gone? But then she realized it didn't matter. She hadn't done this for remembrance. She'd done it for justice. Justice didn't require remembrance. Justice just required truth. She made a will, left her savings, now about $3,000, to the soup kitchen. For feeding those who need it. Left her Bible to Dorothy Klein, the Pentagon janitor. For someone who's watching. Left her furniture to the Salvation Army. For someone who needs it. Simple distribution. She'd lived simply. She'd die simply. Spring 1952. Cherry blossoms again. Edith walked along the tidal basin, watched the pink petals fall. 7 years since she'd spoken up. 7 years since everything changed. The corrupt officials were still in prison. The reforms were still in place. New oversight procedures had prevented additional fraud. Her testimony had mattered. Her silence, then her speech, had changed things. She thought about invisible people. All across America, there were people like her. Janitors, secretaries, maintenance workers, clerks. People who cleaned offices, filed papers, emptied trash cans. Invisible people who saw everything. What did they see? What secrets did they keep? And would they, someday, speak? She hoped they would. When the time was right. When they had nothing left to lose. When their words could make a difference. Summer 1952. Presidential election season. Both parties promising reform, transparency, honesty. Edith was skeptical. Politicians always promised honesty. Few delivered. Real honesty came from below, not above. From ordinary workers refusing to tolerate corruption. From janitors who listened and remembered. From secretaries who kept documents. From clerks who checked numbers. From invisible people who saw everything. She voted. First time in years she'd felt her vote mattered. She voted for the candidate who'd promised stronger corruption laws. Whether he'd keep that promise, she didn't know. But she'd done her part, voted her conscience. That's all any citizen could do. Fall 1952. 7 years since the story broke. Edith was 65, official retirement age, though she'd been functionally retired since 1945. Social Security increased her pension to $95 monthly, cost of living adjustment. She donated half to charity, kept $47 for herself, more than enough. She lived simply, same small apartment, same used furniture, same quiet routine. Church, soup kitchen, library, park. Nothing fancy, nothing public. Just an ordinary elderly woman living an ordinary life. Exactly what she wanted. Occasionally, someone recognized her. "Are you Edith Thornhill? The woman who exposed the corruption?" She'd smile politely. Then she'd move on. No lingering, no basking in recognition. She'd done what she'd done. It was over. Time to live. Lawrence Whitmore visited less frequently now. His career had taken off. Investigative reporting nationwide, exposing corruption in state governments, corporations, labor unions. The federal procurement story had been his breakthrough. Now he was famous, respected. He'd built a career on truth-telling, started by Edith's example. "Edith," he said during one visit, "I'm thinking of writing a sequel about what's happened since 1945, the reforms, the changes. Would you contribute?" She declined. "Lawrence, I've said everything I needed to say. The rest is other people's stories. Dorothy Klein's story, the other whistleblowers, tell their stories. Mine is finished." Winter 1953. Edith turned 66. Quiet birthday. No party this year. Just cake alone in her apartment. She didn't mind. Solitude was comfortable. She'd spent 20 years surrounded by people who ignored her. Now she chose her solitude. Different thing entirely. She thought about her life. 66 years, most of them hard. Childhood in poverty, marriage to a good man who became a broken man, 20 years as an invisible janitor, 3 years as a public witness, 8 years in quiet retirement. Was she happy? Yes. Not because life had been easy, but because she'd stayed honest. Even when honesty was hard. Even when silence was easier. She'd chosen truth. And truth gave meaning to suffering. Spring 1953, 8 years later, Edith received word. Virgil Bascom had died in prison. Heart attack, age 63, 1 year older than her. She felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not sadness, just acknowledgement. A life ended. A life that had been both productive and corrupt. He'd built things and stolen from them, helped people and hurt them. Complex legacy. But the truth about his corruption had come out. That mattered. She attended no funeral, sent no condolences. She'd said what needed saying in her letter 3 years ago. She'd forgiven him. That was enough. That spring, cherry blossoms again. Every year the same. Petals falling, carpeting the ground. Edith walked slowly now. 66-year-old legs didn't move as fast as 38-year-old legs. But they still moved. She was grateful for that. She stopped by the old Commerce building, now housing different offices. Different people. Different work. But the walls remembered. They'd heard everything she'd heard. They were witnesses too. Silent witnesses. She'd been their voice. The walls and the invisible janitor, together exposing what others had tried to hide. Summer 1953. Edith received a letter from the government. Official stationery. Department of Justice. Inside, __quote _166 __. $8 million. Returned to the people. Money that had been stolen from industrial standards oversight and wartime production. Money meant for quality control, for tanks, planes, ships, supplies. Money meant to protect American lives. All returned because one woman told the truth. She framed the letter, hung it next to the little girl's drawing. 2 pieces of paper that summarized her achievement. One from a child who thought she was a hero, one from the government confirming she'd helped recover millions. Both true, both meaningful, both complete. Fall 1953. The season's turning. Edith felt time's weight. Not painfully, but noticeably. She was slowing down. 3 days at the soup kitchen became 2. Long walks became short ones. But she didn't complain. She'd lived longer than Harold, longer than many people she'd known. Every additional day was bonus time. She thought about legacy. What would she leave behind? No children, no great wealth, no buildings with her name. Just a story. The story of an invisible woman who became visible by telling truth. Was that enough? She thought so. Stories taught lessons. Her story taught, watch, listen, remember, and speak when the time is right. If even one person learned that lesson, her life mattered. Dorothy Cline visited, brought news, quote 167 Edith smiled. Quote 168 Dorothy nodded. Winter 1954. Edith was 67. She felt the cold more now, spent more time indoors, reading, knitting, listening to the radio. Simple pleasures. Enough pleasures. She'd never needed much, wanted even less now. She received Christmas cards. From Whitmore's family, from Dorothy Cline, from other people she'd helped over the years. Not many cards. She wasn't a popular person. But each card was genuine. From people who truly cared. Quality over quantity. She sent cards back. Simple messages. Quote, 170. Spring 1955. 10 years. Round anniversary. Decades since the Washington Herald story. Whitmore wanted to write a 10th anniversary retrospective. Edith agreed to one interview. Her last. They met in her apartment. Whitmore brought coffee and pastries, set up his notebook. Quote, 171. Quote, she considered. Quote, 172. Quote, 173. Quote, 174. Whitmore wrote quickly, then asked, quote, 175. Quote, Edith smiled. Quote, 176. Quote, 177. Quote, 178. Quote. The interview became Whitmore's retrospective article, published May 20th, 1955. Front page again. 10 years later, the invisible witness reflects. The article noted that all 16 convicted officials remained in prison or had died there, that $8 million had been recovered, that procurement reforms implemented after the scandal had prevented an estimated $20 million in additional fraud, that Edith Thornhill, now 67, lived quietly in Northeast Washington, her job done, her truth told. Summer 1955. Edith's health declined. Nothing dramatic, just age, fatigue, weakness. Doctor said her heart was tiring, natural at 67 after a hard life. He prescribed rest. She rested. Less soup kitchen, less walking, more sitting, more sleeping. She didn't mind. She'd done her work, lived her purpose. Now she could rest. Rest was earned, not surrendered. Dorothy Cline visited weekly, brought groceries, cleaned Edith's apartment, kept her company. You don't have to do this, Edith protested. I want to, Dorothy replied. You helped me find my courage. This is the least I can do. They talked about everything. Politics, faith, justice, truth. Dorothy was becoming what Edith had been, a watcher, an invisible woman with visible eyes, the next generation's witness. Fall 1955. Edith turned 68. Small celebration. Dorothy brought cake. They ate it together. Quote 183 Dorothy said. Edith closed her eyes, wished silently. Not for herself, she needed nothing. For the future, for more watchers, more truth-tellers, more invisible people who refused to stay silent. She blew out the candles. Dorothy asked, quote 184. Edith smiled. Quote 185. Quote 186. Quote 187. Winter 1956. Edith rarely left her apartment now. Too weak. Dorothy or neighbors brought what she needed. She spent her days in her chair by the window, watching the street, children playing, adults working, life continuing. She'd been part of this life, still was, always would be, invisible but present, silent but witnessing. She thought about dying. It would come soon. Maybe this winter. Maybe next spring. She wasn't afraid. Death was just another transition. Birth to life. Life to death. The cycle completed. What came after? She didn't know. She believed in God, attended church her whole life, believed in judgment and grace. She'd sinned like everyone, been angry, selfish, prideful. But she'd also tried to live honestly, tried to help others, tried to speak truth. She hoped that counted for something. February 1956, Edith Thornhill died peacefully in her sleep. She was 68 years old. The doctor said her heart simply stopped. No pain, no struggle, just sleep to death. A gentle ending to a hard life. Dorothy Klein found her the next morning, called the police, made arrangements, notified Lawrence Whitmore. Edith had left instructions. Simple funeral, no eulogies, no speeches, just a burial. Return to the earth she'd walked. The funeral was small, maybe 30 people. Dorothy, Whitmore and his family, soup kitchen volunteers, a few neighbors. Theodore Brennan came from Pittsburgh, Marcus Caldwell from Chicago. People whose lives she'd touched. Not many, but genuine. They buried her in Congressional Cemetery. Modest grave, simple headstone. Edith Thornhill, 1887 to 1956. She told the truth. No elaborate epitaph, just those 4 words. Enough. Whitmore wrote her obituary, front page of the Washington Herald. Edith Thornhill, federal corruption whistleblower, dies at 68. The article recounted her life, her invisible 20 years, her 3 hours of testimony, her decade of quiet retirement, her legacy of truth. The obituary ended. Edith Thornhill was not a powerful woman. She held no high office, commanded no wealth, controlled no resources. But she possessed something more valuable than power: courage to speak truth when truth needed speaking. She reminded us that the most important people in any society are often the least visible, that janitors and secretaries and clerks see everything, that invisible people can change the world. She will be remembered not for what she had, but for what she did. She told the truth, and the truth set people free. Spring 1956. Cherry blossoms bloomed again. Edith wasn't there to see them, but others were. Dorothy Klein walked the tidal basin, thought about her mentor, the quiet woman who'd shown her that invisibility was power when wielded for truth. She stopped by Edith's grave, laid cherry blossoms on the headstone. __, quote _191 __. She walked away, back to her janitorial work at the Pentagon, back to being invisible, back to watching for corruption. Because Edith had shown her, invisible people see everything. And someday, when they speak, the world listens. Epilogue. 20 years later, 1976. The bicentennial. America celebrated 200 years of independence. Dorothy Klein was 54 years old, still working at the Pentagon, still watching, still listening. That year, she exposed a major procurement scandal. Contractors overcharging for parts, kickbacks to officials, millions stolen. She documented it for 10 years, waited until retirement approached, then spoke, just like Edith had taught her. The investigation led to 17 arrests, $40 million recovered, defense procurement reforms, a scandal that rivaled the federal cases of 1945. When reporters asked Dorothy how she'd gathered so much evidence, she said, quote, a reporter asked, quote, Dorothy smiled. But America disagreed. They called her a hero anyway. Another invisible woman who'd become visible through truth. Another witness who'd refused to stay silent. Another link in the chain Edith had forged. And somewhere, perhaps, Edith Thornhill smiled. Her legacy lived, not in children or wealth, but in truth, in Dorothy, in others who would come after, in invisible people who watched, remembered, and spoke when the time was right. The fight against corruption continued, forever. But as long as there were witnesses, invisible, patient, truthful witnesses, the fight would never be lost. One woman at a time, one truth at a time, one victory at a time. Edith Thornhill's story wasn't just hers. It was everyone's who'd ever felt powerless but chose to speak anyway. Everyone who'd ever been invisible but refused to stay silent. Everyone who'd ever known that truth, no matter how long delayed, would eventually prevail. She was invisible for 20 years. Then she spoke, and her voice echoed through decades. Through Dorothy, through others, through every person who learned that the most powerful weapon against corruption is simply this: the truth, told by ordinary people who refuse to be silent.